Sometimes the story we want to tell may not be our own, and that is where I find myself today. And yes, this is just me playing on a new character and pretending to commentate on the run, but shh, we're not going to talk about that. Meet Azure. And a word of warning, her story gets a little blue. Okay, so it gets a lot blue. Join me as we see how Azure spent her first 100 days in Stardew Valley. I let Azure take over for me on the Riverland farm, and unironically, Mayor Lewis gave her the exact same welcome gift of 15 parsnip seeds. He must really love those veggies, or he's opting for the cheapest crop. Either way, I won't judge. I'd told Azure all about the valley, so after making a chest to store some belongings, she headed off to meet the locals. Caroline would still be beneficial to befriend quickly for tea saplings, but since changes to the local economy meant they sold for half as much as before, Azure's money-making strategy is going to be a bit more versatile. While wandering through town, Azure spotted the most vibrant blue hair from the corner of her eye and was immediately drawn in by the beauty of its wearer. Is picking a suitor day one based on hair color a bit superficial? Sure, but a girl likes what a girl likes. And ever since we were kids, Azure has had a special affinity for all things blue. I wonder how long it will be before she happens upon a certain retailer who I may have neglected to mention in my Valley overview. Later that evening, some special wormies gave Azure a couple seeds for the new spring crop, carrots, which she planted right outside the farmhouse, along with most of the parsnip seeds gifted from Lewis. With the acquisition of her first foraging level overnight, Azure's adventure in the valley was truly underway. Bright and early day 2, Willie sent his customary letter to Cobalt Farm, and Azure was off to answer the call of the wide blue ocean. But she needed to make a quick pit stop first, as she'd somehow missed an introduction to Pam the previous day. Whoops! Guess that will be taken care of a little later on. Once down to see Willie, Azure set herself up for a long day of fishing, surrounded by the tumultuous sea. Thanks to some helpful bubbles and awkwardly placed chests, Azure was quickly getting the hang of fishing, and around 3 p.m. was able to upgrade to a fiberglass rod for the rest of the fishing day. She managed to catch her very first sea jelly as the day darkened to night, and just before closing time, headed into the saloon to meet the final resident for her introduction quest, and to say hi to a certain someone. 3 levels of fishing in one day ain't too shabby, Azure. Day 3 was that customary rainy day, and fun fact about the Riverland farm, you can catch a variety of fish a few steps from your doorway, including the lucrative catfish. These catfish can be smoked in the complimentary smoker found on the Riverland farm, allowing a net of twice their original worth, quality and profession perks included. Evelyn had dropped her glasses in the garbage, so Azure made sure to return them to her while on the way to purchase more bait from Willie. Then it was back to fishing and smoking and fishing. Look at her catching a gold star catfish on day 3 like it's nothing.
I admit it, you are better than I am.
In the evening, she took a detour to the ocean for a slippery eel or two, making sure to head home in time to intercept Emily for what would become their daily chat. And lo and behold, Azure managed to reach level 5 fishing that very night. On the morning of day 4, Azure took a page out of my book and brought Caroline an iridium quality smoked herring. Smoked fish are one of the earliest iridium quality-like gifts you can acquire for most of the townsfolk. Just don't go handing them out to Sebastian or the kiddos. She sold the rest of the smoked fish to Pierre for over 3,000 gold, using part of her earnings for the initial backpack upgrade. Then it was up to the mountain lake to continue the fishing grind to reach that all-important level 6 and a chance at constructing the new bait maker machine. The bait machine requires 3 iron bars, 3 coral, and a sea urchin to craft. Overnight, she reached her level 6 fishing goal, so now only iron and a few forageables stand between her and fishing domination. Marnie stopped by Cobalt Farm with a cream-colored cat the next morning, so Azure named her Creme, before tackling the first parsnip harvest of the season and checking her mail, only to find a letter written on the most charming stationery. Intent on locating the mail's origin, Azure made her way through town, and though she came across a bouncy orb guarding an unreadable scroll, the sender of the blissful blue letter eluded her. Since the letter mentioned the mountain lake, Azure headed there next, finding only a wizened old soldier who gifted her a blade, before leaving her free to roam the decrepit mines with only a sword, a pickaxe, and a few chubs to sustain her as she began her descent, eventually reaching the level 10 elevator and a pair of work boots. The trip through the mines today allowed Azure to collect a few special items, one of which was a topaz she thought for sure would be appreciated by a certain blue-haired bartender. If she thought the Joja letter was aesthetically pleasing, this letter from the wizard took her breath away with its blue-toned gradient and navy pyramids and cutie little turquoise Junimo. So it was no surprise that Azure made the wizard's tower her very first stop of that day. Second stop was to give Caroline her second smoked fish of the week. And then it was on to complete the foraging bundle to collect the wild spring seeds waiting there. Azure spent the afternoon battling through the mines and making it to level 20 before heading home to the farm. Checking in on Azure's progress in the valley, day 7. Relationship building is underway, and her skill development is all coming along, particularly fishing. The crop field on the farm was also increasing nicely thanks to the spring seeds earned from the Junimos yesterday, and the traveling merchant was kind enough to bring a summer spangle to help Azure progress her relationship with Caroline. Clint set to work on the first pickaxe upgrade that afternoon, then Azure spent the rest of the day revisiting floor 21 in the mines to work on a certain monster eradication goal that would provide a much-needed weapon upgrade. It was slated to rain on day 9, so a plan started to form that, if luck was on her side, would allow Azure to make a nice mountain of money. After normal farm chores, she got to work chopping down trees, taking a quick break to bring Caroline an iridium smoked carp, bringing their relationship up to 2 hearts and allowing Azure entry into the lovely tea room. Then it was back to chopping wood until she had collected the 300 needed to unlock the tide pools. Here's hoping a sea urchin is waiting there. But alas, Azure was only able to collect coral today, so crafting a bait maker would just have to wait. Next stop was over to Clint's for some supplies. And can I just say, the quality of life upgrade allowing you to access other services while he's working on a tool upgrade is just... Azure used the rest of the day to clean up around the farm and started an oak tree section just below the northern exit. Clint had finished the pickaxe upgrade and another rainy day was on the horizon, so warning a fortuitous urchin, Azure might still be able to see her rainy day fishing plan pan out. But today is another no, so she headed to swap out her pickaxe for an axe upgrade, then headed home to fish. And though she caught a lot of fish and chests, without the assistance of catfish bait, the fishing session wasn't quite as exciting as it could have been, though she did catch enough to achieve level 7 fishing. Now, this may seem like a joke, but Azure was set to have rain again tomorrow. It would be the 3rd day in a row. Clint had posted a help wanted quest, and Azure was intrigued by the ticket reward, so she put it on her to-do list. Checking the tide pools was also on her list, and lo and behold, a sea urchin was there waiting for her. Now only 3 iron bars were needed to craft the bait maker, so she picked up a few iron ores and the coal needed to craft the bars. Then took to fishing on the farm while the ore cooked, until it was finally time to craft the machine we've all been waiting for. Azure plopped that beautiful blue machine right next to her fishing post and immediately set to work on some catfish bait. Wow, that was fast. Cast over cast, catfish over catfish, Azure continued her task well into the sleepy hours, ending the night with over 30 catfish in her chest and another in the smoker, with the catfish experience gains helping Azure reach level 8 fishing overnight. Now, when I tell you I wouldn't have believed it unless I saw it, for the 4th day in a row, there would be rain again tomorrow. What in the bright blue Stardew Valley yonder? If it weren't for the Egg Festival getting in the way, I'd half expected to rain the rest of spring for Azure at this rate. But on with day 11. Azure spent the morning in the mines harvesting copper ore for Clint's request, and she met up with Clint later that afternoon, earning the prized prize ticket. Those carrot seeds are going to come in handy for Azure as they grow quickly and produce one of the best energy replenishing crops available in spring. With her tasks in town finished for the day, Azure set up the bait maker and fish smoker close to her favorite fishing hole on the farm, and set out for a long evening of fishing. A rainy Friday morning brought Demetrius over to Cobalt Farm, and Azure selected the mushroom cave for access to a free dehydrator. Then she spent the morning catching more catfish. That afternoon, Azure stopped by for a chat with Emily, where she found out Emily really wanted to visit the Calico Desert. This put repairing the bus as a top priority for her. Since she was only a few insects shy of that monster eradication goal, Azure took a trip to the mines, where she made short work of the goal, collecting the insect head from Gil, and headed lower into the mines to search for coal, ore, and to test out the new weapon. Azure made it down to floor 45 before she decided to head back to the farm for the night. Day 13 was a festival day, so after Azure took care of farm tasks, she took the northern route around town to reach the mines, where she spent a little time diving and smelting and smoking fish until it was time to head to the egg festival. Azure picked up a quality sprinkler's worth of strawberry seeds before she showed off her egg hunting skills to the town. After the festivities, Azure headed to the community center and finished up the crab pot bundle, along with the geologist bundle. She'd brought the materials for the blacksmith's bundle, but alas, the treasure hunter's bundle had taken its place. Now Azure would have to scramble to complete another bundle if she wanted to unlock the vault in time for the spring festival on Monday. In addition, Azure would need to pay off all the vault bundles tomorrow in order to have the bus repaired that night. So she made some questionable shipping decisions, netting a cool $15,000 towards her goals. The next morning, Azure was up crafting tea saplings bright and early, selling them to Pierre along with a few smoked catfish that put her well over what was needed for the vault. Then it was to the mines in search of the materials needed for either the Adventurers or Treasure Hunters bundle. Azure finally acquired the solar essence needed for the Adventurers bundle shortly after 7 that night, so she brought it to the community center straight away, along with the bat wings she'd been collecting. A short bank account draining later, and Azure had officially completed the vault bundles, meaning the bus would be available just in time for the start of the Desert Festival tomorrow. Checking in on Azure as we head to week 3, fishing skill is still in the lead, farming is lagging significantly behind, and her remaining 3 skills are all tied for second place. Tuesday, there'd be rain, so if Azure finds a way to increase her fishing level to 10, there is a chance she can catch the Legend Year 1. But that's a story for tomorrow. Today, Azure checked the mushroom cave for the first time and put the dehydrator to use with the common mushrooms she found there. Later that morning, Azure received notification that the Desert Festival was now open as she picked up her fancy schmancy insect sword. Once at the festival, Azure checked in with the day's vendors. Isn't it adorable that Vincent will sell you artifacts? Then she headed down to see Emily and take part in a complimentary makeover. Here's hoping she doesn't do the same to Azure as she did to me, though Azure might appreciate the color palette. It is supposed to rain tomorrow. Good looking out, Emily? Azure decided to take on the Monster Hunter challenge offered by Marlin, but first she chomped down a shrimp donut and set to work on the sandfish fishing quest for Willy. Next, Azure headed to the mines and battled her way to another 35 calico eggs. Combined with the eggs earned earlier, she purchased a good chunk of strawberry seeds that, if planted tonight, would still yield the same harvest as those obtained at the Egg Festival. She'd managed to pick up a selection of gems in the cavern, so the community center was the next stop, where Azure was able to fully complete the boiler room for access to the minecarts. On day 16, Azure put on the serendipitous raincoat given by Emily, before trekking around town in the pouring rain. And that is when she saw it. The looming blue building that seemed to be calling her name, begging for inclusion in her Oh, they're closed. Once open, Azure entered into a world of blue-tinted bliss. After getting the Joja membership rundown from Morris and enjoying a refreshing beverage, Azure ran into Morris again at Pierre's, and the shiny blue coupons he waved about seemed to really capture her attention. If only that discount was real, am I right? The final backpack upgrade certainly wasn't on discount, but Azure purchased it anyhow, and that sky blue really brought out her eyes. What didn't bring out her eyes was the outfit Emily selected for her at the Desert Festival that day. Okay, Emily, I see you. The cavern challenges seemed pretty unachievable today, but she picked up the deep dive quest. Willy's challenge seemed just as daunting with the need to catch a scorpion carp, but the buff acquired from another shrimp donut should help Azure out with that challenge. With the scorpion carp caught early afternoon, Azure headed back to town to take advantage of the donut buff in order to catch the legendary rainy day springfish. Rapidly running out of time on her fishing buff, Azure finally hooked the beast she was after. This would be her only shot at the legend today, and she needed to put all her never mind. Spoiler alert, that would in fact be the only time she hooked the legend that spring. Already near the mines, Azure headed inside where she made an amazing discovery. It appears the mines are connected and descending floors in the regular mine nets you an egg rating similar to if you were traversing Skull Cavern. Very interesting. Luckily, Pam was taking a holiday, so Azure was able to drive herself back to the desert at 11 that night, where she turned in her, questionably acquired egg rating of 11. After the rain, there's usually a rainbow, so I'm not surprised Azure was able to find one fully equipped with a pot of gold and leprechaun hat. What did surprise me was how well the outfit Emily had picked out yesterday would coordinate with Azure's latest headpiece. The raincoat I could ascribe to Emily checking the morning weather, but how do you explain this fancy getup? Azure snagged the monster hunt quest for the cavern today, and she was able to slay the final one just before 9 that night. Where was that floor earlier? Oh yeah, and at some point today, she dropped in to see Clint for a pickaxe upgrade. Day 18, Azure made a stop to see Robin about building organization, and to turn in Robin's missing axe. Lewis was requesting a dandelion in exchange for a prize ticket, but before she could claim the ticket from the mayor, Azure came across a tantalizing blue box behind the Joja Mart that contained a prize ticket of its own. Very nice. Azure now has an orange sapling that should be able to produce fruit come summer. Back on the farm, she made sure to rearrange the storage and crafting machines after the house move, then worked on the farm until it was time to bring Pam a parsnip for her birthday, and gift Emily an amethyst for her second gift of the week. They've got to be so close to 4 hearts by now, right? Jody requested a cauliflower the next morning, so Azure packed one in her bag along with the dandelion requested by Lewis. Handing that over materialized both a prize ticket and the gopher achievement. And when turning in the ticket for some flower seeds, I just know Azure saw a bed she'd want for her own house in the awaiting rewards. Next, she grabbed her pickaxe from Clint, then handed over her axe for a steel upgrade. Upgraded pickaxe in hand, Azure took to the mines where she made it to floor 70 before calling it. And later that night, she had a surprise visitor dropping more of those mysterious blue boxes. Doctor, is that you? After taking care of some farm chores, Azure made a trip to the desert to meet Emily's best friend Sandy, and while there, found out that the cavern was still locked, despite being available during the desert festival. Well, there was only one thing for it. Back to the normal mines, where Azure made it down another 15 levels before ending early enough to bring Shane a beer for his birthday and chatting Emily up. They are officially at 4 hearts, so I see a flower dance partner in Azure's future. Also in her future is a chance for double forage harvests and some extra ore. Emily made a new feathered friend on day 21, and Azure was able to pick up her steel axe, with which she broke through a giant log that was blocking the path to a giant stone, that was blocking the path to a crouching tiger hidden trash can, and the alleyway buffet book inside. Reading this book turned Azure into a trash super searcher, and then she was back to the mines, making it all the way to floor 100 shortly before midnight. Overnight, Azure managed to reach level 9 fishing, so a rainy day on this final week of spring means she'd easily have another shot at the legend. Alex was offering a ticket in exchange for a jade on the morning of day 22, but instead of bringing it to him right away, Azure spent most of the day setting up a side field of potatoes. Then she headed to the mines where a star drop that reminded her of a certain color was waiting on floor 100. Not sure if she didn't see the time or if she really wanted to reach the bottom of the mines, but that night Azure passed out on floor 119. What are the odds that final rock was the staircase? The next day, Azure brought Alex the jade he requested, and with the prize ticket from the quest, picked up a few mystery boxes that contained totems. Lots and lots of totems. Later in the afternoon, Azure was back to the mines where she managed to reach the bottom, acquiring the skull key that would allow her to enter the skull cavern again. There was another of those blue present-looking boxes on the floor in the Adventurers Guild, but she had a lot of slaying to do if she wanted to enter the back room to reach it. Azure spent the rest of the evening foraging in the secret woods, taking a break for a cold one with Shane, before heading to the saloon to chat with her crush. Before bed, Azure planted a few tea saplings that should be ready this time next season, selling any excess for a bit of profit. As usual, Azure had a lot of watering to do the next morning, so the flower dance had already begun by the time she was finished. Once at the dance, she purchased a few items from Pierre's stall. With that out of the way, Azure was ready to get this party started. Pam had taken the next day off, so Azure would have to drive herself to the desert. Azure made it without incident and was able to pick up a batch of speed grow to use in summer. She also tested out the skull key, taking a mini dive before heading back home for the night. On Friday, Azure brought Pierre a birthday car prize, snagged a tea leaf from Caroline's sunroom, and headed to the mountain lake for a day of fishing. And that is when she got an ancient seed. Are you kidding me? My last run, it took until year 2 for me to find an ancient seed, and she just casually fishes one up spring year 1? Excuse me, I need a minute. Blah, blah, blah. She smokes some bass and ship it off for Lewis to pick up overnight. Okay, pull it together, Aubrey, because today is an important day. It's Emily's birthday. Azure got to enjoy one of the most psychedelic events in Stardew Valley, gave Emily a pretty blue gem for her birthday, then proposed going steady in one fell swoop. With a skip in her step, Azure spent the rest of the day doing some deforestation in Cindersap, where she uncovered a mysterious door in the cliffside. The Emily entertainment continued on day 28 when she invited Azure to see the townsfolk change up their styles. And since it was the last day of the season, Azure made sure to harvest all the potatoes, selling them to Pierre for about 10,000 gold in profit. The start of the gifting week meant that Emily got a new emerald, and there was a certain blacksmith who was less than thrilled at the budding relationship between Emily and Azure. But he rose above his discomfort and still participated in clothing therapy because he knew how important it was to Emily, or something. I'm watching you, Clintorino. While still at Lewis's, Azure picked up a lovely cup of Stardrop tea with the ticket she'd earned from Willie. And might I say, those awaiting prizes are pretty exciting. Great job keeping up with that request board, Azure. The final evening of spring, year 1, Azure spent in the mines slaying dust sprites and ruminating on her plans for the coming season. Azure gave Sandy a sweet pea on that first sunny summer morning, before picking up a field's worth of starfruit for planting, along with a few dozen other crops from Pierre's. It was early afternoon before Azure managed to plant and water all the starfruit, and as night was falling, she was still working away in the fields, trying to get any remaining seeds into the ground before bedtime. Day 30, Azure found out there was a mystery in Willie's back room before heading to the mines on the hunt for a squid kid for the wizard. She didn't get up to too much else that day, but overnight, there was an earthquake that officially unlocked the spa and railroad in the north. On day 31, summer was in full swing, and until she unlocks quality sprinklers, it looks like Azure will be spending a good portion of her days caring for her crème and crops. And it was on this day that Azure learned that not only does Pierre lock his entire shop on Wednesdays, but he also takes credit for produce you sell him. The nerve, I know. Almost makes you want to boycott his shop entirely. She spent the rest of the day fishing at the ocean for the now available summer fish. And yes, that was 2 sea jelly in a row. Then Leah got a red mullet, allowing Azure to get a fancy new blue bed. Sweet dreams, Azure. Karam had vacated the old bed in the morning, so Azure was able to put her little house in order. And since a thunderstorm was on the horizon, Azure crafted and placed a few lightning rods to help protect her crops. And since it was Thursday, she headed down to the desert for another batch of deluxe speed grow, and to pick up a gold star coconut for Jas's birthday. The first rainy day of summer, Azure didn't have to water crops, but there was some wheat ready for harvest. Then she spent some time fishing catfish in the secret woods, and smoked a few before it was time for bed, where she dreamed up the ability to make quality sprinklers. After watering her crops on day 34, Azure placed down a good batch of quality sprinklers. This will reduce her watering time significantly every morning. Look at Farm Girl Azure and her impressive skill growth, along with her growing relationship with the delightful Emily. She's gonna need a bigger house soon, but looks like today will not be the day Azure commissions it. Instead, she headed to the mines to smoke fish while working on monster eradication goals. On day 35, Azure received a saucy letter in the mail from Emily, asking to go camping in the secret woods. Later on, I saw her hesitating at the traveling cart, and between you and me, I wish she had picked up that rare seed. But she bought a fish stew instead, and used it to help her catch the legendary crimson fish. That evening, Azure turned in materials for a couple bundles, before heading to slay some ghosts in the mines. The next day, the wizard was pleased with Azure's ghost busting. And Gus seemed to notice how happy Emily was with Azure now in her life. How cute! That night, she was back to the mines, smoking catfish, and working on monster slaying goals. On a dark and stormy day 37 morning, Azure set out a few more lightning rods to help capture the energy of the day. Speaking of rain, there's a certain item that would be available to allow Emily and Azure to get more serious with the relationship. But there's one little problem: house size. Azure spent that afternoon fishing in the secret woods, then got to work chopping hardwood to increase her materials stores. Day 38 meant the first batch of starfruit was ready for harvest, so Azure harvested the field before making her way into town to sell some produce to afford the next batch of... Oh no! It's Wednesday. Azure? Oh gosh. How will she get the money for more starfruit seeds? It's okay. I'm sure she'll figure it out. Alright. It looks like she's packing up her bag with all manner of monster loot and minerals. I think I see where this is going, but will it be enough? To cover the 12 sprinklers with 8 seeds each, that is 96 starfruit seeds needed at 400 a pop. Add another 500 for the bus ticket to the desert, and Azure will need to come up with nearly 39,000 gold to fill out that waiting field. She managed to leave Clint's shop with a little over 22,000, a respectable start. Once the Adventurers Guild opened, she sold a few items there for another 4,000. Next came lining her bags with all the fish she'd been hoarding. Selling all of those put her well over the money needed for her desert purchases. And now it was the mad dash to the bus stop before Pam left for the evening, and into the desert oasis, where Sandy and the starfruit seeds awaited. Crisis averted, Azure planted down her starfruit seeds, before heading back to the mountain lake to gift Maru a strawberry for her birthday. Azure not only unlocked kegs from her farming today, but she managed to reach level 10 fishing and selected the angler profession. On the day of the luau, Azure made her first stop be to the mines, where she worked on recouping some of the materials sold the previous day. Then took to the dance floor with Emily at the luau and added a silver quality starfruit to the tub, earning the best possible response from the mayor. Despite yesterday's festivities, Azure must have still been in a bad mood from Wednesday's Pierre debacle, or perhaps Alex just rubbed her the wrong way. Nope, she is definitely still testy, but either way, she stopped in to ask for the first house upgrade. And Robin set hard to work on it the very next morning, in the pouring rain. Here's hoping Azure has enough lightning rods to protect a certain brave carpenter wielding a large metal hammer. Azure had found the final dwarf scroll in the mines yesterday, so she was able to pick up her subscription to Dwarfolingo. And if you were one who bet that starfruit would be the first fruit in the kegs, you'd be right. Evelyn was seeking a fire quartz in exchange for a prize ticket, but before taking care of that request, Azure asked Clint to upgrade her axe to gold. Gus was selling a complete breakfast that would have been perfect for Alex's birthday today, but Azure was fresh out of funds, so she gave him an iridium quality smoked halibut after picking up her prize ticket from Evelyn. The prize ticket awarded 4 mushroom logs, an item that will produce mushrooms every 4 days when placed near wild trees. Azure made sure to place the logs near her oak resin orchard once back on the farm that evening, and busted her way in to meet the dwarf later that night. Let's check in on Granger Azure's skills as we come to the end of the second week in summer. Combat is the lowest, but at this rate she may have all levels maxed out by the end of the season. She's been making decent progress on eradication goals, and the best way to work on both the monster goals and combat skill is for her to spend even more time in the mines. Azure took some time to rearrange her bigger home on day 43, and picked a patch of squash and peppers. Next she picked up her axe, and headed back to the mines for the day. I'd run too, little sprite. On Tuesday, the telly let Azure know there was rain on the horizon, and with her freshly upgraded house, I'd expect a wedding in her near future. The rest of the day was a bit of a mystery as she chopped wood, killed slimes, and planted a bunch of trees up near the railroad. The first mushrooms from the logs were waiting for Azure the next morning, and after finishing her farm chores, Azure made a beeline to the old mariner waiting patiently at the tide pools. For the relatively low cost of 5,000 gold, the mermaid pendant was now in her possession. Azure decorated her house to make it a little more homey before heading to see if Emily would help her to make it feel like even more of a home. I'm so excited for their wedding. With her leftover funds, Azure asked Robin to start on a coup on one of the southern islands. Then she was back to the mines, and is it me, or is this mine layout particularly aesthetic? Day 46, Azure spent nearly the entire day down in the mines, and with a few more floors like this, she should be reaching her Dust Sprite Slayer goal in no time. The following morning, the starfruit field was ripe, and if Azure manages to replant them again today, she will be able to get a third harvest of starfruit this very first summer. Thankfully, Pierre was open today to sell crops to, but knowing Azure, she's not the forgive and forget type. Sandy got a gift in the desert, and Azure got the seeds she needed for the third and final planting. At the traveling cart, Azure picked up a garlic, and once again, I wish she'd snagged the rare seed there. But alas, she did not. Later on, she intercepted Demetrius on his way to the saloon for his birthday, and heard about the infamous trout derby starting tomorrow from Willie. That night in the mines, Azure slayed the final dust sprite needed to pick up the highly coveted burglar's ring from Gil. Day 48 was the day Emily and Azure were married. And I agree, Lewis. Let's get right to it. Now, I'm not saying she wanted to rub it in his face, but the first person Azure talked to after the ceremony was Clint, when she stopped in for a gold pickaxe upgrade. The Trout Derby was her next stop, earning a tent kit for her very first golden tag, and deciding to call it for the night around 8 p.m. Probably doesn't want to keep Emily waiting alone too long back at the farm. Day 2 of the Trout Derby saw Azure back at the fishing action that afternoon, and her final golden tag of the derby produced a fancy bucket hat reward. There was an ominous weather report on the telly day 50, so guess we'll see what that's about tomorrow. But for today, Azure was able to harvest her first batch of tea leaves before dropping by the mines to give the dwarf a topaz for their birthday. Clint had finished with the pickaxe upgrade, there was a request on the board offering another prize ticket as reward, and Azure headed over to Joja Mart? Wait, what are you doing? No, don't talk to him. Listen, Azure, I know you're frustrated with Pierre, and the blueness of this place is calling to you, and just wait. Think of the Junimos. Do you really want the community center torn? Oh, okay. I guess you do then. Well, moving on to a trip to the desert. She set out into the cavern in the early afternoon, reaching floor 56 before heading home in time to restock jars and kegs with normal quality starfruit. And then, an eerie green haze settled over the valley. Though Emily thinks it's a blessing, so I guess it must be fine. Just maybe wear a hat or something when you go outside, Azure. As she explored the town that morning, Azure came across most of the residents hiding out from the inclement weather. Practically everyone, in fact, except... Oh, Demetrius, is that you? The other resident who didn't seem fazed by the haze was Linus. He even seemed to have some inside information on the event itself. Azure did make a pit stop from checking on residents to purchase the first community development project from Joja. If Morris is true to his word, the bridge to the quarry will be repaired overnight. Later, Azure took Linus's advice about the special trees only being around for a limited time and ended the night with a respectable 111 moss collected. As promised, the Joja crew was out in force to repair the bridge that very night. But you gotta wonder how that guy made it across. Gunther dropped by to hand over the key to the sewer on day 52, and Emily made a subtle hint about a certain sewing amenity their place was currently lacking. I wonder if Azure will take that hint. With the quarry now open, Azure made her first trek over, heading into the mine there for Grimm's golden scythe. Morris was good on his word about the quarry, so Azure took a chance and purchased the panning project, leaving only the greenhouse before the valley would be officially developed. And that evening, she stopped by to gift Willie a birthday diamond as he fished off the pier. Once again, Joja employees did as asked overnight, and is that the bridge scaler from the night before? This guy must be a grade A daredevil. On day 53, Azure sold enough artisan goods to Pierre to reach just over 35,000. Money in hand, she raced cheerfully into Joja Mart to purchase the final development project. So after tonight, Azure will have a shiny new greenhouse. I've never been inside a Joja warehouse before, so it was actually kind of neat seeing Azure discover it. Though if we're being honest, the community center looked better, even pre-renovation. I also find it interesting that Willie is unaware of why the boulder disappeared. This leads me to believe that Morris is not blasting his good deeds out into the valley for all to hear. Sure, Azure funded the work, but Morris offered up the project in the first place and even appeared to work overtime as acting foreman. Regardless, the Joja crew got to work again that night, despite the downpour and accompanying lightning that was surely a safety hazard. And is Grade A standing up on top of that roof beam? Oh my daredevil. As it was a good luck day and she needed iridium, Azure took a trip to the desert on day 54, and on floor 37, lucked into her very first prismatic shard. She wasted no time turning that shard into the coveted Galaxy Sword, and when she headed back home, she could hardly contain her excitement, though the parrot was the only other resident not already sleeping. Shh, don't wake Emily. Day 55 was another rainy day, but apparently you don't have to see the celebratory Joja scene in order to have Willie's back room open up. The bookseller was in town, and Azure took the opportunity to pick up a handy price catalog that would allow her to see the sell price of the goods in her inventory. Then she headed to the ocean to see Willy, but before he let Azure in to see the boat, he gave her a crabtastic jump scare for good measure. Eventually, Willy did take her to see his dilapidated old boat, and Azure wasted no time donating the 5 batteries, 200 hardwood, and 5 iridium bars to make the old girl seaworthy once more. That night, she finally investigated the renovated greenhouse. Unsurprisingly, the first crops Azure planted there were some brilliant blue ancient fruit. And so beginneth the final day of summer. Azure harvested the last round of tea leaves before starting in on the field of starfruit. It was the first non-rainy day since Azure had finished off the development projects, so Morris and his employees were waiting by the warehouse to celebrate. Loving the blue balloons, but I gotta be honest, I'm a bit sad that Grade A isn't among the celebrities. Hopefully he didn't have a mishap during the greenhouse repair. Azure got a big thank you from Morris and the Joja Corporation, even receiving a soda machine that will certainly match her aesthetic. The next round of Joja developments would replace the Joja warehouse with a movie theater, but let's just say the price tag is slightly out of Azure's means, for now. So instead she spent some money on a coop upgrade. As Azure waits patiently for the start of the Moonlight Jellies Festival, let's take a look at her skill progress as she rounds out another season. Farming and fishing are both at max level, with mining lagging just behind at 9, and the remaining 2 sitting in a respectable level 8. And now, time for a magical evening. Azure? Emily? Did you hear that? Are you both okay? On the first day of fall, Emily showed newscaster-level amazement.
Can you believe it's October already?
I cannot believe it's October already.
I can't believe it's already October.
At the calendar change. Instead of rushing off to buy fall seeds, Azure spent the morning planting any seasonal or general seeds already in her inventory. Having reached level 10 farming and selecting Artisan the night before meant that Azure was able to make bank on all of the goods she's been saving up. But it would still be a while before she could afford the $500,000 needed for the movie theater, so she settled for a little blue decor before heading to the desert for more special oasis seeds. That day, Lewis told Azure he had no idea how the quarry bridge was repaired, and all I can think is maybe pay attention to your town a bit more, Mayor Lewis, if that's even your real name. Anywho, with her farm fall crops already tended, Azure made her maiden voyage over to Ginger Island, where she immediately found a few discarded tent kits and the mummified frog in the deep dark jungle. After much running about, Azure had collected enough walnuts to open the island farm, and she spent the evening setting up as many crops as possible, camping out on the island just moments before 2 a.m. Azure was up with the island sun on day 58, finishing up planting the seeds she'd brought the day before. Then it was back to walnut collecting, and a little more farm debris cleanup. Back in the valley, Azure came across Lewis supervising Robin installing a sign in the pouring rain, and I have to admit, I felt a bit of deja vu. It seems only fitting that the very first special order accepted was for Azure's very own wife. Speaking of Emily, Azure had promised to meet her for a romantic campout, so she headed to the secret woods, but was sidetracked by a tree that had fallen over in a windstorm a few nights prior. Just as well, since I think Emily postponed that date due to inclement weather. Also tonight, Azure placed a dino egg to incubate now that her coop had finished being upgraded. And she spent some time quietly renovating the house with items from her newly acquired Joja catalog. On day 59, Azure worked more on brightening up the place, then handed over all the gems Emily requested, resulting in her receiving the spousal star drop, as well as a prize ticket for Lewis's vending machine. Back at Joja Mart, Azure picked up 96 cranberry seeds and a few striking blue wallpaper samples. The cranberries filled out the western field, and the wallpaper really pulled her house aesthetic together. Willy had requested a quartz, which left Azure with 2 tickets in hand. What's this? A new relationship book. Explosive. That evening, Azure was back on the island where she unlocked the dig site, busted out the professor, collected any walnuts in sight, and camped out, sans her lovely wife for the second time. Day 60, Azure spent some time in the volcano until she had enough walnuts to unlock the hut on the island farm. Then checked in on the fallen tree, where she found a hungry hipcoon. Various clothing items had been stacking up in the mines chest, and Azure took the opportunity to transfer them into the pretty blue dresser back home. Azure had been taking such good care of Creme that they had developed a real bond by day 61. The traveling cart was in town for the first time in fall on the 5th, but she wasn't selling the rare seed Azure had passed on purchasing the last season. At least Azure was able to fish for the legendary fall fish later that afternoon. And she dropped off the other fish requested by the raccoon, receiving a whopping 25 broccoli seeds in the process. Nice. Later on, Azure was down in the mines finishing up a slime slaying quest, heading back to town in time to walk Emily home from work. Marnie had some new pets available for adoption on day 62, so let me know in the comments if you think Azure should find a friend for Creme. Before heading to the island, Azure checked out the bobber styles available at Willie's shop and picked out the one that spoke most to her. As it was raining, she was able to make some progress on the gem bird pedestals. Then headed to the volcano for some collection and destruction, making it to the dwarf vendor on floor 5 late in the evening, and fighting her way to the very end where she reached floor 10, unlocked the shortcut to the caldera, and warped herself home, making it to bed with mere moments to spare. Day 63, Azure took a totem trip over to the desert, where she traded in jade for staircases before heading into the cavern, finding a few sprinklers on floor 25, and deciding to warp home shortly after midnight. The next morning, the first of the cranberries were ready for harvest. Azure found Linus's berry basket on her way to place a battery pack in the tunnel lockbox. Then ran into the wizard at the train stop, handed the basket over to Linus near the bathhouse, and tossed a rainbow shell into the box on the train platform. Later, Clint opened up a nifty wallpaper that would look lovely in Azure's house, and she commissioned Robin to build a silo just west of the greenhouse. That afternoon, Azure picked up a new special order quest to slay a bunch of bugs. Luckily, Krobus agreed to open the bug lair, so Azure was able to make some progress on Willie's quest before picking up the Dark Talisman for the wizard's request. The bookseller was in town on day 65, and Azure couldn't pass up the chance to run faster. After reading both The Way of the Wind Part 1 and Ol' Slitherlegs, she's becoming quite the well-read lass. Azure moved her growing collection of kegs to the quarry that afternoon, and spent a good chunk of time cutting down trees she'd planted by the railroad. That night, Azure lucked into a good chunk of bugs that helped her complete the Juicy Bug special order, and she dropped them off to Willie's barrel before heading to bed. Day 66, Azure gave Marnie the amaranth she requested, then snuck into Marnie's room to snag Lewis's lucky shorts. Next, she requested Robin build a shed, then headed over to see Lewis and exchanged his dirty laundry for a vintage logo cap and a bonus dehydrator. Stylin'. Also stylin' was the shiny copper trash can Azure picked up from Clint's. She later asked for an iridium axe upgrade before grabbing an iridium rod from Willie's shop and heading to the island to show the cavern frog her garlic and melon and wheat. Oh my! The walnuts earned from the gourmand were used to open up the beach resort. Day 67 was a Thursday, so Azure took a trip to the desert to pick up some deluxe speed grow and starfruit seeds from Sandy, essentially draining her account. Once back in the valley, she gave Jody a birthday cake before setting off for the island to pick beets and take names. She spent the evening planting available sprinklers with speedy starfruit, and finally headed up to the top of the volcano to snag the items she'd not had time to collect that other night. With her first shed now completed, Azure placed in some kegs on day 68, then strolled into the forest to find her raccoon friend now had a wife who was selling the new seasonal seeds. They were requesting dried blackberries and coconut jelly to grow their family further. But before she started on that request, Azure remembered to place some beets in Lewis's fridge, picked up her iridium axe, and finally asked Clint for a hoe upgrade. Back on the island, there were only 2 empty gembird pedestals, so Azure took a shot and managed to complete the puzzle first try, allowing her to open up the island trading post. Around 8, Azure headed into Simon's cave, and after 4 in-game hours, she gave up trying to figure out what Simon says. Still on the island the next morning, Azure fished in the Pirate's Cove, then headed back home to gift Abigail an amethyst, and give Marnie the corn she'd requested. The field of cranberries was ripe for the picking, so Azure tackled that before heading to the mines on the hunt for ghosts for the wizard. The next morning, Azure brought the raccoon blackberries as requested, but the jelly would take a few more days to complete. Clint found a walnut in a coconut, and Robin and Demetrius were having a head-scratching exchange when Azure stopped to ask Robin for a coop upgrade. While there, Azure was reminded what a devious, lying little snake Pierre was. We know this, but it still annoys. So Azure made sure to pick up the grape seeds she needed from Joja Mart that day instead of Pierre's. In the mines that night, she took care of a few red slimes that would award her another prize ticket. But on her way to turn it in, Azure and Abigail were jump-scared by the ignoble Pierre. Once out of that uncomfortable scenario, Azure picked up her mystery boxes with a ticket earned from Lewis and made her way to the secret woods for the long-awaited camping trip with her wife. Let's give them a bit of privacy. Monday means another special order on the board, and this week, Azure chose to help the wizard with his request. But first she headed to the desert to feed the dragon, gift Sandy for her birthday, and chop down trees she'd planted there weeks ago. That evening, Azure was still in the desert, replanting all the trees she'd felled before they got in Sandy and Emily's way, and I'm sure that's the only reason she chose today to do so. Anywho, she walked Emily home from the bus stop and sold her first batch of cranberry wine before heading to bed. The next day, Azure's first dino had hatched, and she named him Agama, hoping he'd share the color pattern of his namesake, but alas, he was the normal dino green. With the coconut jelly finished jellying, Azure was able to hand it over to the raccoon in exchange for one of the new books, the Raccoon Journal. That afternoon, she headed to the fair with Grange goodies in hand, winning the Blue Ribbon achievement for her first place display. After bulking up her star token wallet, Azure headed to the vendor to pick up the Rarecrow, prize ticket, tasty star drop, and token fedora, because what else would you pick up when your wife is into fashion? Speaking of that blue devil, Emily had a little request for Azure the next morning. She'd need 200 fiber for her secret project. I don't know about you, but I am brimming with anticipation. Apparently Azure was too, because she wasted no time bringing the requested fiber to Emily that morning. Next, she purchased a rabbit named Hippity and another named Hoppity. The prize ticket from the fair allowed for another item out of the vending machine, and she finally commissioned Robin to build a barn on the farm. Demetrius was on the island and gave Azure a celebratory shot for hatching a dino egg? What the what? I have never seen that before. Some of the starfruit was ready on the island, allowing Azure to acquire a few more golden walnuts, and she headed to the volcano for even more. Day 74 was an amazing day for walnuts in the mussels on the island shore, so Azure was able to unlock the mailbox. Her first piece of mail was Leo letting her know she'd been airlifted home from the volcano the night before. Marnie was gifted a diamond for her birthday, and once back at the Valley Farm, Azure had a field of cranberries to harvest. That evening, Azure made her way to the mines on the hunt for ectoplasm, and was able to find it from a ghost on floor 66, making it back home in time to keg a batch of starfruit before bedtime. For her third level 10 profession, Azure picked out Prospector. Day 75, there's no footage, but Azure bought a blue couch from the traveling merchant, brought the ectoplasm to the wizard, and headed to Skull Cavern, where she made it to floor 68. See, there's the sofa now. Just before noon on day 76, Azure asked Robin for a barn upgrade, then picked up a request to bring Pam a seaweed for a burrito. Is Pam making sushi? Either way, there was a prize ticket waiting near the special order board that she was able to trade in for a copy of Mining Monthly. Bringing the seaweed to Sushi Pam meant Azure could snag another prize, but instead she headed to the desert for more starfruit seeds to plant on the island. Once there, Azure lucked into a panning spot before stumbling into quite the show. Dang, Emily sure has some moves. After she finished checking out her wife, Azure took to the fields to plant another batch of starfruit, slowly but surely filling out the island farmland with this lucrative crop. The next day was really busy, as Azure got to work harvesting starfruit on the island, gifted Robin a rabbit's foot as she worked on the barn, sold some quality crops to Pierre, handed out tea to the rest of his household, and Clint requested an iridium pickaxe upgrade, bought a copious amount of starfruit seeds from Sandy, blasted her way into the casino, replanted the fields on the island, built the warp tower back to the farm, and headed back home, completely unaware that Emily's day had been just as busy. I can tell she loved it because, well, it was blue and because Azure put on the outfit immediately. Gotta love that fit. It's the final week of fall, which means a new special order is up for grabs. Azure is low on the egg creators, so she went with the fishing request posted by Demetrius. Then grabbed the Star Drop tea waiting for her at Lewis's place. She'd killed enough monsters to enter Marlin's back room for the special gift waiting there, but there was more slaying to do, so Azure spent the night in the mines working on monster eradication goals as much as possible without her pickaxe. Overnight, she managed to reach level 10 foraging, becoming a botanist. 4 down, 1 combat level to go. On rainy day 79, Krem found the coziest place in the house to nap, and Emily would be spending time inside with the parrot, so what was Azure to do? Well, there were still farm chores to do, blacksmiths to bother, ores to collect, and monsters to eradicate. Thankfully, the last few could be done out of the rain, though there was the occasional fog in Skull Cavern. Since day 80 was George's birthday, Azure brought him a golden leek, and I know there's a joke in there, but I can't seem to articulate it. Later that morning, she was back to Skull Cavern, working on combat skills and monster eradication goals well into the night. There was a new little head poking out of the raccoon house on day 81, so Azure dropped off the dried mushrooms and white algae they requested, earning herself a new cap to add to the collection. That day, Azure learned how to craft the flute and drum blocks from Robin, so next time it's raining on the island, she'll have a blue-haired mermaid in need of serenading. While still at Robin's, she requested the final barn upgrade, then went on a mini shopping spree at the bookseller, picking up Combat Quarterly and the galeful sequel to Way of the Wind, before making a trip to see Sandy about some speed grow and starfruit seeds. Azure made a mini dive in Skull Cavern, and on floor 2 was able to fully level her final skill, for which she selected Brute. On day 82, Azure had a mysterious notification saying that a new way had opened, but instead of searching for it, she sat outside of Marnie's until she opened, and purchased nothing. Alrighty then, I guess it's a window shopping kind of day. Later, Azure did make her way down to the secret door, finding the note left by Grandpa outlining the purpose of this room. After taking a quick gander through the mastery bonuses available, she found her way over to the island with flute blocks in hand to take advantage of the rainy day audience, then made time to expand the island starfruit crops. Azure woke up on the island day 83 and headed straight to another secret door, this one boasting a walnut on the front and a mysterious blue being behind. She selected Key's Hungry Challenge as her first quest from the Walnut Room, and saw she was less than a quarter of the way to perfection on the tracker. Time to buckle down, Azure. At the Island Trader, she purchased a few golden coconuts and the crafting recipes they had there. She also managed to pick up a mango sapling and a few taro tubers for planting, continuing her shopping later that night when she picked up the jack-o'-lantern recipe and rarecrow from Pierre's stall at Spirit's Eve. The pumpkin maze was a breeze for Azure, and she headed home in time to harvest the final batch of forageables of the season, and ship out a few dozen items to work towards shipping perfection. On the final day of fall, Azure spent the morning fishing on the farm until she completed the Biome Balance special order she'd picked up from Demetrius. Then got an interesting Joja letter from a shady-sounding character named Fizz. Today was the last cranberry harvest, as well as the last day to reach floor 100 of Skull Cavern without eating. Armed with an evil number of staircases, Azure started her descent. She took it easy on the first couple dozen floors, but after falling through a hole on floor 29, Azure started putting her ladders to use, making it to floor 100 just before 9 p.m., acquiring the 25 key gems and some bombs to add to her reserves. Back on the farm, she chopped down the orange tree and pomegranate tree to plant inside the greenhouse, then hummed a little tune as she headed to bed, putting the wonderfully productive fall season behind her. A winter chill has descended on the valley, but my oh my, Emily's new fit is pure fire. Azure is one lucky lady. While near the train tracks chopping trees a bit later that morning, Azure took a second to open the witch's swamp, but instead of heading in, she went right back to chopping. After Robin's was open, she stopped in to request another house upgrade, stumbled upon Shadow Guy outside the bus stop, and eventually tracked him down near the playground to receive the magnifying glass. It was Krobus's birthday, and between gifting him a gold quality pumpkin and Stardrop tea, Azure was able to bump their relationship up to 6 hearts. Later on, she paid a visit to the raccoon shop for powder melon seeds that she planted back on the farm that night. The next morning, Azure headed to the island and picked up a quest from Mr. Key that I warned her not to take, but she just wouldn't listen. 27 days is a lot of time to complete it, but I still have nightmares from my bingo challenge run and that quest. And I forgot to mention that yesterday, Azure picked up the Prismatic Jelly quest and a quest looking to slay 6 red slimes, so she spent time in the mines working on both. No jelly yet, but Lewis was grateful the slime count was down, and Azure advanced the vending machine another tick. Kerem treated Azure to a pretty blue periwinkle on day 87. It is so cute that pets can now gift their owners. Around 10 AM, Azure headed back to the mines for the wizard's special request. But it wasn't until 10 o'clock that night that she finally caught sight of the lovely strobing orb. Double jelly drop. Nice. The witch must not have liked Azure helping out her ex with the jelly, because she paid a little visit to the coop for some mischief and mayhem. On day 88, some time was spent making sure things looked pretty for Emily. The raccoons had another goods request for Azure on her way to drop the jelly off to old Razzle Dazzle. Today was also the day she selected her very first mastery in farming. The Statue of Blessings and Golden Animal Cracker perks look pretty neat, but I have a feeling that the Iridium Scythe is where the real magic is. Winter meant cold animals unless Azure purchased a heater or two, and placing auto-grabbers would save a lot of time on daily collection. She also purchased a duck named Cayuga, a cow named Bonnie, a goat named Bluey, and a sheep lovingly referred to as Beryl? I guess it was so cold without the heater, the poor rabbit lost a foot. Spending continued when Azure picked up her usual starfruit seeds and deluxe speed grow from Sandy. But she also selected a piece of decor I know Emily will just love. That afternoon, she was on the island to plant starfruit and gift villagers tea, though it may not be the Long Island Shane was expecting. It was early evening by the time Azure had finished with her crops, and back on the farm, she set even more to grow in the greenhouse. A bigger house meant more decorating for Azure on day 89, and this included setting up the mannequin where Emily was sure to see it. She even picked up a classy portrait of Emily from the traveling cart that she displayed proudly in the entry room. That also doubles as their bedroom, and TV room, and kitchen. Day 90 started as unassuming as any for Azure, as she embraced Emily and headed out to start her day, only to discover that Snake Clint had the gall to ask Azure to gift her own wife an amethyst and say it was from him? Tell me you're joking, Clint. Well, Azure took this request far better than I would have, as she handed the gem over to Emily that very morning. And what a doll Emily was, pretending to misunderstand the amethyst origin. These two really are the cutest couple. The gift request from Clint prompted Azure to go on a gifting spree all over the valley, making sure to stop by Clint's in particular to gift him A copy of Mining Monthly, B, a seasonal holly, C, an amethyst, or D, some coal from Santa. If you picked C, congratulations, you and Azure are far classier than me. I'd have given Clint his hated holly. After her gifting day was done, Azure filled out more of the greenhouse with ancient fruit that she sprinkled with a touch of fertilizer. As the first week of winter came to a close, Azure spent the morning propagating key fruit before checking on her friendship situation with the other residents of the valley. This meant another gifting day, but not before picking up the fruit trees she was missing from Pierre. Caroline received a gold quality summer spangle for her birthday, and most other residents were given a lovely cup of green tea. She must have felt brave that day, because while down visiting the residents of Cindersnap Forest, Azure took a detour to hook and catch the feisty glacier fish, then proceeded to catch the goby from the waterfall, and picked up a festive headpiece from Hat Mouse. Later that night, she planted her new trees in the greenhouse, then chopped wild trees on the islands of her farm. Kerem was looking particularly cozy in her Santa hat the next morning, and Azure spent the morning replacing powder-milling crops with key beans she'd collected. Monday meant another special order request was available, and Azure seemed excited to see that Caroline was requesting a large taro root shipment. Then, on her way to the Ice Festival, Once at the festival, Azure picked up a few decorations before dominating the competition, catching 7 big ones. Oh, and there was this uncomfortable interaction with Clint. Why do you have to make things so weird, Clintorino? Things are looking festive on Cobalt Farm day 93, and Azure was hard at work growing key fruit and fetching food for her raccoon neighbors that morning. That afternoon, she took a trip to the island where she harvested the taro planted there, collecting all 100 needed for Caroline's request. While still on the island, Azure picked up the Skull Cavern invasion quest from Mr. Key, as well as the recipe for magic bait that will allow her to ignore season, time, and weather when used while fishing. Back in the valley that night, Azure slayed the final ghost needed for the Wizard's Bounty quest just as the clock ticked over to 1 a.m. The next morning, Caroline sent Azure a cauliflower and the recipe for solar panels from shipping all the taro the day before, and a lovely batch of starfruit wine was ready for re-kegging in the shed. That day, Azure headed over to see Marnie about a Chicken Little, the wizard about her successful ghost hunting, and saw that Lewis was spending the town's money to stock the vending machine with literal diamonds. The wizard had posted yet another monster slaying quest, so after patiently waiting for Sebastian to exit his cave and gift him a birthday present, Azure was back in the mines on the hunt for the bulbous beast. Starfruit and the Skull Cavern was the name of the game on day 95, so after purchasing a boatload of seeds from Sandy, Azure could be found blasting her way through the radioactive ore and dangerous monsters in the cavern. And while she only made it down to floor 50 before heading home, Azure was able to collect 22 of the radioactive ore that would make it possible to work on shipments and recipes needed for perfection. Azure had a small collection of golden animal crackers that she gave to her bunnies the next morning, then headed to buy a pig from Marnie that she named Wiggly. A festival was going on down at the beach that would give rewards for catching enough squid. After checking in with Emily, adorable, she cast her rod and got to squid fishing. Azure caught the maximum of 8 squid shortly after 8 and headed over to collect her rewards that included but were not limited to a shimmering pearl and a book that gives crab pots a chance to yield more. Starfruit were ready in the greenhouse on day 97, and harvesting those meant Azure had enough points to unlock the fishing mastery, giving her the advanced iridium rod that would come in handy for day 2 of Squidfest. But first, she made a trek over to the island to harvest and replant all the starfruit crops waiting there. Back at the pier that night, Azure used the bait maker to help quickly fish up the 10 squid needed for day 2 of the festival, and was granted an even bigger bounty than the previous day. Look at all that treasure. On day 98, Azure expanded her jelly production indoors and filled the jars with starfruit before propagating more key fruit in her growing fields. Later that morning, she crafted some magic bait and brought Harvey some pickles for his birthday on her way to the mountain lake on the hunt for a legend that evaded her grasp. At least attempt number 2 went swimmingly, and Azure was able to haul in the fish that had eluded her last spring. She then headed to the Witch's Swamp and caught a void salmon, along with a void mayo that she gave to the henchmen blocking her path. The wizard appreciated her efforts, and somehow Willie caught word that Azure had reeled in the legend earlier that day. News sure does travel fast in this small town. The next morning, Azure was up early stocking the fridge with ingredients needed to craft a few recipes, and later expanded her key fruit crops even further to make sure she'd meet the looming deadline. It was dark before she made her way into town to pick up the community center cleanup request from the special order board, and visited the night market where Clint shared some concerns about the mermaid show. Oogling or not, Azure enjoyed the show, then tapped the clams for a pearly surprise. Then it was onto the submarine to catch the midnight squid, the spooky spookfish, and a token octopus she'd missed out on catching earlier in the year. And so, we come to day 100, the final day of the video. Full disclosure, I know what Azure gets up to for the rest of the year, but you'll just have to wait until the next episode to see. Unrelated, do send me your best baby blue names in the comments. But back to the final day. Azure planted some of the crops picked up at the market yesterday in the greenhouse, before strolling into town for her annual checkup with the good doctor. Afterwards, escaping the snow to spend some time on her island farm. Kegs were ready to be cycled that evening when she returned to the valley, and she had plenty of time to visit the night market stalls, After catching the blobfish lurking at submarine depth, Azure had only 5 fish remaining to catch before becoming a master angler. With the aid of magic bait, could she achieve this by the end of the year? With this goal now in mind, Azure took to the sewers where she hauled in the mutated monstrosity, but gave up on catching the slime jack that night. So the question remains, will Azure be able to catch the final 4 fish before winter is over? Will Emily and Azure's budding relationship last through their first hectic holiday season? Can Azure raise enough funds to purchase the movie theater and eventually perfection? And finally, perhaps the most important question of all, will Azure find a pet friend to keep Creme company? Only time will tell, but until then, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.